How's it going, everybody? And welcome to another edition of the Building Out Loud podcast. That's right, we are building out loud. I am one of your hosts, Mac Conwell, aka MacTheVC. If you follow me on Twitter, I am here with my co-host, Liam Gill, aka Lawyer Liam. Wow, Liam, I can't speak this morning, but it's okay. We can keep that all in. Liam, how you doing today?
Doing good. I saw the camera just glitch there. Hopefully that doesn't happen again.
And apparently my camera just glitched. Hey, we are now speaking in the dark. This is amazing. We got to keep this all in. This is how we roll. How's it going, everybody? On today's special edition of Building Out Loud, we're going to have an interesting conversation that I know that our entrepreneurs regularly have with themselves and their teams, which is conferences. Are they worth it? Should you go? Do you make good connections? Are they a waste of time? Are they a waste of money? What do you think? Let's get into it. But before we do, I want to get a special shout out to our amazing sponsors. All right, Liam, I'm going to ask you first. I have really strong opinions on this, but from your viewpoint, are conferences worth it? Should founders be spending money on conferences?
Oh, well, we already know we're going to disagree here, but personally, I'm not a massive fan of conferences, and I'll tell you why. I understand that they're a good networking opportunity, but I think for the cost benefit in terms of the amount of time you have to put in, the money sometimes you have to put in, I just think that you can make a lot better connections by talking to customers, reaching out to VCs, going to accelerators, going to co-working spaces. I think there's just so many better ways of networking. And I think if you're going there for information, I find that conferences are like the blind leading the blind for lack of like better term. Like most of the people who talk at conferences are people who are looking to get exposure. They are early on in their fields and their careers, and most of them don't really actually know what they're saying. Like if you're going to go to a conference where someone like Jason Calacanis is speaking, it's going to be like $700. I think the all-in conference was a few thousand. Like you're not going to get that quality of speaker unless you're paying disproportionately large amounts. So for most of the conferences that founders are considering, I don't think the information is there. You'll find way better information on somewhere like YouTube. And I think in terms of networking, I just think that there's better value for money and value for time than conferences.
Spoken like somebody who had the privilege of going to a really good school and being well connected. I love it. Completely disagree with you. But I also think that speaks to your personality a bit too. If you can't tell, my friend Liam here is not the most extroverted person in the world, and he does really well with one-on-one connections. I don't know what he looks like trying to work a room of a few hundred people. I feel like that's one of those things that he is not excited for. Me, on the other hand, as a more extroverted individual, I love rooms like that. And I think there is real value in going to conferences, especially for somebody who doesn't have a network yet. Like if you're somebody who's trying to build a network, accelerators are great. Working with investors and other entrepreneurs are great. But if you don't even have a network of those folks, you got to start somewhere. And so you start going to like local events, going to tech meetups and things locally. The next step after that is conferences, right? Much larger group. It's a great place where if you go to one of these conferences where there are investors speaking, it is a great chance to run into those investors. Don't run into those investors and think they're going to invest in your company in that moment, but it's a great chance to get some FaceTime, maybe get their email address. And so when you do actually email them, it is no longer a cold email. You can say you met them at a conference. There's real value in that. You also never know who you'll run into at a conference. I can't tell you the amount of times I've made connections while waiting in line to get the crappy bag lunch that they have, or in the bathroom washing my hands next to somebody, or just walking around the floor looking at exhibits and having people come up to me. So I do believe in the value of conferences. I do believe in the value and the ability for them to build your network and make connections. Now, I will say this also. If you're going to make the investment to spend money to go to one of these conferences, you have to go there with the mindset of you're going to meet as many people as you can. That means you can't run into one entrepreneur or one person and become enamored and engrossed in the conversation and spend 45 minutes speaking to one person. That ain't what you're there for. You are there to meet as many people as you can, to make as many connections as you can. Also, now I'm gonna run into some tips. One of the tips I use. A lot of people give out business cards, some people don't, right? I stopped taking business cards to events because I found out that people who really want to do business with you are going to find a way to get your contact no matter what, right? People are just being polite. They'll say, hey, can I get a business card and keep it moving? That's number one. Number two, when I was getting people's business cards, I always had a pen in my pocket. That way, if I got a business card, I can always write a quick note on the back of it. And typically it was to let me know if this was somebody important I needed to reach back out to or not, right? I used to have a rule. If I met you at a conference or an event, I had 48 hours to reply, to send you an email to say we should get together. Thank you for meeting, whatever. 48 hours. Well, when I go to conferences and get a bunch of them, I write on the back of them, trying to, a little tidbit about who the person was, why I should connect, and whether or not they should be in that 48-hour window. That's number one. Number two, here's a trick for you entrepreneurs who are trying to figure out how to grow your thought leadership and your presence. All these conferences, the folks who put them together, they're looking for people to put on stage. So one of the things I used to do, and one of the things I suggest the founders that I invest in to do, is to get a list of conferences you want to go to, then try to find out who are the people that are throwing that conference and start sending them emails pitching yourself to be a speaker. Here's the amazing part about that. If you find, let's call it 15 to 20 conferences you want to speak at, and you reach out to every single one of them, I guarantee you'll get invited to speak in 1 to 5 of them. Somewhere between 1 to 5 of those conferences, you'll be invited to speak. Here's the best part about being a speaker. When you go to a conference, the people you typically want to meet are all the speakers. And so if you're a fellow speaker, that means you get to hang in the speaker room, which means you get to have close to one-on-one, like enclosed, small, intimate time with these folks that you may want to meet. Sometimes they may be investors. Sometimes they may be entrepreneurs. Sometimes they may be potential partners. Sometimes they may be potential customers. You get to have that. Number two, you get to go to the conference for free. And very often they'll give you a few extra tickets so that you may be able to take members from your team for free. If it's one of those conferences where they're having exhibits, typically you'll get a free exhibit booth. So now you'll have to pay for an exhibit booth, right? And if you're lucky and it's one of those big time conferences, you might even get an honorarium, which means you get paid. So not only do you get to go to the conference for free, get a booth for free, you may get a check and a free hotel and free travel. So that means for you founders who are struggling, who may not have a whole lot of money and like, hey, I can't do those conferences, it's not worth it. Well, here's a way for you to get real value out of it. Just reach out to the folks. And here's the other thing. Folks who throw conferences, they take cold emails a lot better than VCs do, right? This is just kind of a little bit of business development tactics, right? And so I've been rambling for a bit. But Liam, I know you don't think conferences are that great. But if you were advising a founder who's like, hey, I got this conference, I got invited to speak, I'm going to be there, what advice would you give them to try and stand out above the noise?
Yeah, I think for sure. I'll qualify what I said earlier. I think if you're going to go and you're going to be able to speak, that's a completely different thing than going and just attending. Because speaking also comes not only with the opportunity to meet people, but with some level of credibility or some level of sort of authority behind who you are and what you're doing. So it comes with this extra level of sort of social proof, which helps you gain customers, helps you gain investment. Like it helps in a lot of ways. So if you're going to speak, you're going to like instantly raise your profile with every single person in that room, whether they're a speaker or an attendee. So there's a lot of value in that. And I can say that when I started my own company, I actually spoke at our Durham University at a blockchain conference, and I spoke at that conference. And that's actually where I met the investors that eventually invested in our company. And, it was a year and a half later that they invested and, built a relationship over time. But that conference really...
Time out. Let's highlight what Liam just said, because this is a really, really important point for you founders. He spoke at a conference and met his future investors, but he met them and started building a relationship, and they didn't invest until a year and a half later. So when you first met them and you knew they were investors and they didn't invest, did it piss you off and make you never want to talk to them again?
I think I'm like lucky enough to have always had the mentality that as long as people treat me well, I'm fine building relationships and knowing they may or may not pay off. Also, there's certain investors, these guys were a group of them, where they offer something more than money, and they're willing to offer that even if they're not invested yet. So if they have interest, they're still willing to, once a month take an email and just provide some advice or provide some tips, or, say what it would take to get that money, and, to keep you sort of informed along the way. And that was really valuable for me as a first-time founder, was to have an investor who was telling me, this is kind of the metrics you would need for us to more seriously consider you. And you also have to consider the way that the VC works. So, most work very similarly, but, that was one of the 5 partners at their firm. And so he was talking to me, working with me, but, his sort of, the way he came across was, at the end of the day, there's 5 of us. You're going to have to convince 2 others before we ever write you a check. So here's what I think it will take for us to get you across that line. And that was a year and a half of having that conversation of, this is what you need to do. This is what you need to stop doing. This is, what I advise. This is what we typically look for. So you get those insights.
Did you ever get frustrated in that process? You're like, dude, just give me the money. You say you like me. You say you want to help. Like, what's going on?
So there was one point where he essentially said that we were at a point where we would get investment and promised a certain amount, and we agreed on valuation. And then he took it to the rest of the partners, and we didn't get the investment. That was frustrating. But I would say generally, this might just be who I am as a person. But as you said, I tend to build like good relationships with people. I'm very much, I don't have a million friends. I have a small group of friends, but I'm very close with them and like very respectful with them. So as long as there's a respectful relationship, I tend to be able to continue working with people. I have had other investors where they've straight away wanted to invest, or straight away said no, or gone about it in like a very weird or rude or way. So either they've agreed it instantly, they've gone back to their partners and realized it wasn't going to happen, and kind of just like ignored you and written you off. Or people who just say no straight away without ever talking to you, offering advice, being willing to engage in conversation to keep the sort of conversation open. And at least as a founder, I think the worst is people who are like, come back to me later, who then do not reply to anything for like months. For me, that's probably the one where you get the most frustrated and annoyed. And that's the one where when you have future rounds and multiple people interested, that investor is not one I'm considering. But I know there's different reasons why investors act in different ways. And a lot of them, it also depends on their personalities and the way they go about doing business. Some of them, again, like building those close relationships with people that they like and hope those people are bet on those people building good companies. Others just like building relationships with as many founders and companies as possible and betting on certain companies once they reach specific metrics. So yeah, I think it really depends on the founder and the investor and the relationship you have and the way you operate. But for me personally, getting a no isn't the end of a relationship or something that frustrates me. It's more the way that you go about getting the no than anything else.
Just wanted to like highlight that these relationships, and when you're looking for funding, it's very rarely does it happen right then and there, right? And especially when you're early on in the process, it can take time to build. But I'll let you go back to your story. You spoke at this conference. You met those investors a year and a half later. They actually made an investment. But continue your advice for a founder who is going to be at a conference or speaking at a conference.
Yeah, so there's a few things I would say. Number one is if you have the chance to speak and there's going to be people in the room who are either customers or who are investors, or if the conference has enough of a name that saying you spoke at it will provide you some sort of influence with those groups, that's a reason in and of itself to do it. So that'd be my first thing. Is although I'm against generally attending conferences unless you have a very, very clear person you want to meet and goal for going, and you can make the cost and the time work. I do think as a speaker, it's a completely different value proposition. It's a completely different way of thinking about it and a completely different strategy for why you would or would not go. In terms of strategy, once you are a speaker, number one, I would say, make sure you know who you want to get in touch with. Make sure you know who you want to make connections with. You need to kind of know who's in the room, and you need to, ahead of time, know that this is someone I want a few minutes with, or someone that I need to get a phone number from or an email from before you ever get to the conference. So when I attended, I had a list of all the speakers. I knew generally who the sponsors were and who the VCs coming were. And I already knew which ones I wanted to talk to, which ones I didn't want to talk to. And it makes it a lot easier when you get off the stage and people are sort of rushing to ask you questions, or even when you're on the stage. So when I was on the stage, there was a question and answer period. And just my luck that the VC I wanted to talk to had their hand up. And for me, I knew ahead of time who they were, where they were sitting, and I knew instantly as soon as I was there that that's a question I need to answer, because that starts a conversation in a very natural way. And afterwards I can go up to them when there's a reception and say like, hey, like, let's talk in more detail about the question you had. And that's just something very important. If you come in blind, you might miss that opportunity there and completely miss that connection because you didn't know who that person was, or you didn't know that that was someone that you should be building a connection with. That's number one. Make sure you know who you want to meet. Number two would be to make sure you know what you want to get out of it. So what message you're trying to get across. Because this is something I think founders really mess up when they speak at conferences, is that you'll be invited. So for example, there was a conference that I was recently talking to organizers about, and there was another founder who was running a virtual reality company that does virtual reality meetings. And he wanted to come essentially just to pitch his business. Like that's at the end of the day, that's what most founders want to do. But the conference needs to organize that or present that in a different way, which is we have this great speaker to talk about the future of Web3, or to talk about how from Zoom to his company, you know, something like that. Like you need to have some sort of trend or some sort of actual topic. And as a founder, what you need to do is understand, number one, what that topic is going to be and be involved in picking it. A lot of founders give the sort of spiel that I'm an expert in this field, my company does this, and I want to come talk. And then they let the conference choose what the topic is. That needs to be more of a collaborative process, because you can really, really emphasize the expertise or uniqueness of your company if your talk is specifically about what makes you special. If your talk is about your USP, you have a whole 15 minutes, way more than most investors would ever give you, to talk specifically about what makes your company great and what makes you as a founder different. And that is a very unique thing. So you need to be very involved in that process of determining what you're going to talk about as much as possible. Number two, or number three, I guess now, would be once you know your topic, you need to really understand how you're coming across, and you need to understand how that relates to what the listeners, whether that be the VCs or customers, whoever you're trying to target, is actually trying to get out of their business or get out of them buying or investing in your company. So I think in short, it's just have a very good strategy. If you're going to speak, understand who's there, why you want to talk to them, make sure that you're involved in choosing what you talk about, and then make sure that you talk about it in a way that connects with those people who you're trying to get either your investment from, or people to buy into your company, or to buy your products, whatever it is. Make sure that you understand what they want, and make sure that that topic comes across in a way that appeals to their needs.
So I'm going to jump in a little bit here and add some more color. What I would say is, one, if you're speaking, you do have the ability to ask the organizers for a list of attendees or a list of other speakers. That's really important, because then that allows you to reach out to those folks ahead of time to set up meetings. If you're going to be traveling for a conference, you want to try and set up as many meetings as you can for the times when you're not speaking, so that you can get those conversations going with folks that you normally don't have access to, right? Another thing, when you're thinking about conferences to speak at, there should be two types of conferences you're generally looking at. One are just startup or ecosystem conferences. That's for thought leadership. That's to meet people in the space. That's to meet, investors and potential partners. Those are awesome. The second one are industry specific. Industry specific are really important because that's where you find your customers, right? And sometimes those are where you also find industry specific investors. Those are the two type of conferences you typically want to be at. Now, let's say you're not a speaker. Okay, that's fine. You're just going to the conference. Here's what you want to do. Before you get there, you want to look at the agenda and you want to map out which talks you want to be at and why. Whether it's because there's information you want to learn, or there are people there you want to meet or interact with, right? Number two, before you get to any of these sessions, start forming in your mind a question to ask. Because at the end of most talks, there's a Q&A session. Always, always, always raise your hand to ask a question, and try to ask a thoughtful question during the Q&A portion, right? You want to go with a canned question already before the conversation, and you want to come up with a question while you're sitting there that pertains to something that one of those speakers said. And when it comes, and so when they ask for Q&A, be the first one to raise your hand and ask your question. Why is asking this question important? Is it because you want to learn the information? Sure, maybe. I don't care. It's not really about the question. It's about an opportunity for the speakers to see you, hear who you are, and hopefully hear you say, ask a thoughtful question. Because what happens is, at the end of the talk, everybody bum rushes the stage and tries to hand the speakers their business card or tell them about their business or pitch them or whatever. If you're one of the people who asked the question, they are going to remember that. And now you actually have a touch point with those speakers. So that means the opportunity for them to remember you and be more likely to answer your question or answer your email or have a follow-up becomes higher. It's a little trick for those who are going to conferences, right? Ask that question. When you go up to the stage, they're going to remember you. They're going to remember the question. And if they say that was a good question, you know you're in there. You're going to get an email address. You're going to get a chance to talk to them. That's going to happen. I still do that to this day. If I'm at a conference and there's somebody I want to meet with, I always make sure I ask a question. It is a great way to start to get to know people. And also, it gives you a chance to say what you do. So if there are anybody else in the crowd that may be interested in working with you, they now get to hear you too. So it's not only just for the people on stage, it's also for the people surrounding, right? It is a great way. Matter of fact, I'll do a quick story time. I once went to a conference in Portland. I just showed up because I wanted to be a part of the conference, but I knew I was an investor and I should be on like some VIP list, but I wasn't, right? Because I didn't prepare enough. So for the first talk of the day, I was there. And when I went there asking my question, I gave everybody my bona fides and told them who I was and where I invested from and why I was there and didn't ask my question. And within an hour, I was on a VIP list, got to go to a special dinner, and everybody in the room knew who I was. And so I got to connect with all the people I wanted to connect with. Now, that's a little different because I was an investor and everybody likes to talk to the guy with money. Awesome. But if you're an entrepreneur in the room and you're building a business that affects other people in the room, they will take notice. So please, please, please understand these are simple, practical tips that help you work a room, help you work a conference. Also, for those of you who are more introverted, you're like, hey, conferences ain't really my thing. I don't really like networking. Networking is hard. Here's what I used to do. Because like, even for me, when I first got started, it would be difficult for me to go into these rooms, especially as a large black dude and nobody else looked like me, to just start networking. So what I would do is I would make a game of it. I would give myself a number. And somewhere usually between 5 to 10. It was like, okay, I got to speak to, 6 people today before I can leave. And so that just meant the sooner I spoke to 6 people, the sooner I could leave. And it will always happen. So by the time I got to like the 4th or 5th person, I would start to feel more comfortable. I would start to feel more normal. I would start to get more excited about what I'm talking about. And next thing I know, I look up and I've talked to like 25, 30 people without thinking about it, right? Make it a game for yourself. And then there were times where I went in, it's like, all right, I got to talk to 6 people, talk to my 6 people and rolled out, right? Like that happened too, right? But I still met 6 people and I still hopefully got 1 or 2 good connections out of it. Sometimes I didn't. Sometimes I get to 6 and then get in good connections and be like, all right, let's keep working again. Let me add 2 more to it to see if I can meet somebody. And so, try to make it fun, try to make it a game, try to make it easier on yourself. But with that, I think we kind of hit this topic pretty hard. Liam will tell you, hey, if conferences ain't your thing, they're not your thing. You don't have to do it. It's not the only way to network. I'm going to tell you, it's not the only way to network, but it can be a really effective way to network. So even though we disagree, there's still value in it. And if you're going to be a speaker, we both agree you need to be at them conferences. But before we get out of here, Liam, you got any last words for the folks?
No, I think we covered it all. I think one thing to note, though, is if you are introverted and you're not someone who likes to speak in public or meet with 30 different people, I'm very much like that. If you put me in front of a crowd, I'm perfectly fine. If you tell me I need to network, I can do it, but I would never choose to do it. Like, you would have to force me to go to the room. But one tip that does work really well, sort of carry on from Mac's tip to ask a question, is that most introverted people will probably do a much better job of actually listening to the presentation and focusing on the content and digesting it, because they're less concerned or naturally less aware of like what's going on around them, and not really looking around trying to find connections all the time. It's just not the way that you tend to operate. You tend to be someone more quiet, might sit in the back of the room, want to listen to the information. And the benefit of that is that you will probably be able to come up with more relevant questions that are very thoughtful and insightful in the moment. Like you might not do what Mac's doing and prepare a question ahead of time and then jump up straight away and ask a question, but you might sit there, come up with a very, very good question during a 15, 20-minute speech, and halfway through the Q&A period or towards the end of the Q&A period, have a chance to ask that question. And if you're a speaker, especially if you're someone like me, or I see Mac at this point, like aside from networking, one of the reasons that you speak is also that it's an opportunity to have your views and visions challenged. It's an opportunity to be met with very interesting opinions and thoughts from people who aren't the people that you work with every day, the people that you live with, the people who you associate with. Like I know what everyone in my life thinks and the way that they act and the way that they'll react to certain things I do. The best thing about conferences and situations like, this podcast, people replying to it, is you get new opinions and you get new perspectives. So if you're able to actually offer that and intellectually pique the curiosity of the speaker, you're in a very, very good position that when there's a reception at the end, or when there's some sort of, more open opportunity for everyone to network, that you'll get that one-to-one conversation. You won't need to deal with, working the room. If you've gone through 2 or 3 days of asking very thoughtful questions to 7 or 8 different speakers, those speakers will remember you, those speakers will want to talk to you. And when you walk up to them, you're not going to be in a position where you're fighting with 10 other people for their time. Like they'll single you out, as Matt kind of said, and you'll get that one-to-one time. And that'll be a lot more within your realm of comfort, that you're not necessarily working a room. You're more just having those one-to-one conversations, those conversations where you can sort of treat them more like a friend or a close contact than you would have to treat, someone who you're just trying to pitch within a minute and move on. So that would be my biggest tip, would be try to ask very thoughtful questions, try to know who the speaker is, know where they're coming from, and ask questions that will make them think. Because as long as they're thinking, they'll be thinking about you, and they'll be wanting to continue that conversation down the line. And that will always give you an in to having the type of interaction that you're more comfortable with.
All great tips. So I hope you were paying attention, everybody. And so with that, this concludes another edition of the Building Out Loud podcast. Be sure to subscribe, unsubscribe, resubscribe, unsubscribe, resubscribe. Make sure you play with those algorithms to let everybody know how amazing we are. Please leave us a 5-star review. If you leave us a 5-star review, ask a question or leave a comment, we might just read it here on the podcast. So please interact. If you got any questions for us, got comments, got criticisms, please email us at buildingoutloudpodcast@gmail.com. That is buildingoutloudpodcast@gmail.com. My man, Lawyer Liam, will make sure he gets to you. Also, before we get out of here, Liam, tell the folks about your company.
Yeah, it's lawforstartups.com. That's law, the number 4, startups.com. And you can get free legal templates. And we have a twice-weekly newsletter where you get information on changes in privacy law, employment law, tech law, everything that you'll need as a founder to sort of stay up to date with the laws in your space and save money on those early legal fees by accessing free legal templates.
Amazing. And so with that, hope you enjoyed this one. Thank you to our amazing sponsors, and we out. Peace out, y'all.